It's time. It is another tier list for Set 4 League of Villains. I have included the chibi characters, and I am not here to mess around. This is not going to be a sealed tier list or what you might see tier list or your favorite little pet deck and maybe go to a PTC. No, this is the real tier list brought to you by the content creator who has the most accurate, the most factual, and the best, most definitive tier list in the entire MHA community. So this is going to be very, very simple. These characters at the top are better than these characters below them. It is not a matchup chart, and so some characters might be better in the specific matchup of a character above them, but we're talking overall into the field, which characters are better than the others. If your character has been left off the tier list, that means they do not matter. It does not mean that they can't make a top cuts. Anyone can have a great run at a tournament, but we are talking about which characters are better than other characters in this current format and going into the DLC, because that DLC is going to be available April 7th, and you can go use unplug it. Sorry. You can go to unfunstuff.com. I'll leave that in. You can go to unfunstuff.com and use the code plugin to save 5% on your orders. And of course, use the UGN referral code ACE. Now that that's all out of the way, let's jump into the meat and bones of it. Starting off at our D tier, these are characters who just made the cut for having basically a really good offense, or, you know, having some really cute tricks like Mr. Compress and All for One, who can have momentum really in the game to use things like Decoy Duplicate. But these are also characters that have well-known game plans and pretty obvious holes in their game plan. You know, a lot of these are characters that just add damage. I put Eraser at 3 here because I'm a little bit optimistic. I think that the ignoring progressive is kind of a big deal, and once the Futures Now comes out, I think the life symbol for that character really picks up. Moving up to the C tier. The C tier is characters that have a little bit more complexity to them. These are pretty unique characters. Both Torus make it in here because they kind of change the way you play the game, but these are characters that don't have a lot of direct support, you'll realize, right? We have Kirogiri, both the Torus in here. They don't have full kits. They don't have like a full set dedicated to them. And then Ochako 1 has dropped off a lot recently with a lot of the momentum hate, and I really wanted to put her in the D tier, but she has some very unique plays that only she can make, and maybe I just play against good Ochako players. You know, a lot of really good players are high on that character. As far as like a pet deck goes, so that's probably the closest to a pet deck inclusion. And then Sero and Toga are just really strong characters that don't add too many stats. You know, Toga's got the speed, but that's not much. And then Sero relies on getting speed from other places. He usually plays the kick package, and you know, he doesn't have anything that really leans into his gimmick of discard. A lot of those discard cards require a little too much investment, but these are both decks that can absolutely goose you if you don't have any defense for their setup, and because they're not heavily explored characters, they tend to have a lot of different builds for them. I've played against a lot of different types of Toga, even after the Gamer Toga deck came out, so I still want to believe in those decks, but they do not have anything that is glaringly busted about them. Now, the B tier has some things that are glaringly busted about these characters. However, if you'll notice, 3 out of 4 of these characters have a once per game. I am going to point out that I added Denki 2 to this list, but I don't have Denki 1 on here. This is supposed to be Kaminari 1. Denki 2 is not a real character. It just doesn't exist. There's not enough momentum payouts for a 6 hand size to really do anything in a format with capture evildoers and, you know, just E-flip discard of momentum flying around. Not to mention every set has a new attack that discards momentum in some way. So that is supposed to be Denki 1, but Denki 1 and Fourth Kind both really jump on a deck that's not performing well. And that theme is really supported with Shigaraki as well. These are 3 order characters that say, if you're going to check poorly on your own throughout the game, I am absolutely going to annihilate you. These are characters that you might not necessarily have to tech for, but they are characters that you do have to respect pretty much at all times. And again, sort of like the bottomer tiers, like they change the way you play the game, but you can adapt to them. I also put Innsmouth here because both the evil and the water versions have just a really nasty aggro game. There's not a lot of things you can do against it. You'd have to be playing an absent character like Mina 2 Dot to really have some kind of defense or some kind of tricks you can do. So yeah, and the targeted commit is super powerful, right? The simply, point and click at one of your foundations is something we see all over the format. He has that on face. So I believe this deck is only going to get better with time. It really just needs to find some kind of a defensive trick. Now we get to the A tier. This is the stuff I expect to see in top cuts the most. These are decks I expect to see actually winning full-on tournaments, right? And we're going to start with Midnight. Midnight's at technically the bottom of A tier. None of this is in a super strict order, but I do think Midnight might be the weakest in this tier, only because we kind of know her game plan now, and she adds speed and reduces speed to very specific attacks. And I think she is a character that if you build your deck with her in mind, you can play around. She doesn't really allow you to adapt your play style, but depending on your matchup, right, she kind of fluctuates wildly. Luckily at the HLC, we pretty much knew what people were going to be running. And those chaos attacks, right, she just kind of lives off the fact that chaos attacks are absolutely cranked right now, and chaos's blocking potential is absolutely cranked. So she's got a lot going for her there. I don't think I can put her any lower than A tier, but I don't think she's going to be like paramount. Again, nothing super unfair about what she does. Next, we have Asui, who has pretty much only unfair things that she does. But Asui 1 has been in this sort of really weird limbo where you're playing a surprisingly honest game, which it pains me to say that because offensively there's nothing really honest about her. But you do have to be taking some risks a lot of the time. In the current format, and especially against a lot of these other A-tier characters like Momo, like Eraserhead, even like All Might 3, she's probably going to have to put together like a 6 or 7 attack string to really get anywhere, much less try and win the game. But once she gets Prone to Dry Eyes going, she goes off the rails completely. So there's a few too many pieces to really put her in S tier, and she requires you to have a patient defensive minded approach, in my opinion, to really feel confident. Obviously, she can absolutely pop off on you turn 2, and there may be a life version out there that I just haven't seen yet, and she could easily shoot back up into the top tier. But as of right now, she is a little honest, and especially with the appearance of Eraserhead at top cuts and winning these PSCs, I think that she sits firmly in A tier, but she gets one more piece, she gets one more damage pump, she gets one more ranged attack or kick attack that's really good, and she shoots right up to S tier once again. Then we have Dobby 2. Dobby 2 is something that I'm surprised wasn't in S tier. He has almost on-demand momentum hate, which really makes me not want to play any of those momentum-based strategies that I put down in D tier. Luckily, Denki gets it all at once, and maybe has a chance to actually spend it. And Jiro up in the S tier is spending it through flash attacks and before you get to hate on it, right? And you can't do it defensively. If you could swap out actions defensively, I'm sure he goes up to S tier, even with the 2-symbol restriction. But this deck has just underperformed a little bit from being a super absolute menace, but it is definitely a deck that you have to be prepared for. It's a little linear. It's a little too focused on just playing a bunch of attacks, and it doesn't have too many things that help you put those strings together. But this character absolutely just accidentally does 30 damage. Next up, we have Momo. Momo makes it to the A tier once again. She gets almost nothing new per set, but we do finally have ally cards. You remember back when Koda's kit came out, I said I'm a little afraid of Momo getting these cards, and we finally have a few more ally targets for Command Pigeon Flock. Most of the Momo players I've seen have been either on like some grindy good symbol throw value package, which the good symbol is, just fine, and we'll talk about that more when I get to All Might 3. But I've also seen a lot of the life ally builds that get a ton of card advantage, still has a million blocking potential. Again, modifies the way you play the game, makes it very difficult for an average normal deck to actually play the game. She really just warps the format around. Can you do gamer toga things? Can you put together 30 damage from like 2 moves that hit, or play 8 attacks? Those are your 2 options. You either have to play 6 attacks and then 2 moves that deal 30 damage combined, or you have to play like 8 attacks and they all hit or they all drain life in some way. And that's just not realistic for a lot of decks. And so Momo is positioned very well in this format. Next up is Eraserhead 1. Now, a lot of people are going to argue with this and be surprised that he's not an S tier because of how he's been performing recently and how well positioned he is against the format. But I don't think Eraserhead is very good against Jiro. I think Jiro is specifically good against Ojiro and Eraserhead. So when you see your Provisional Store Championship metagame that's unfolding and you're like, okay, well, I got to be worried about Eraserhead. I got to be worried about Ojiro too. What are decks that are pretty good against it? I think Jiro actually fits that mold. On top of that, Eraserhead just still has this issue of like, you have to be playing it perfectly, right? I don't like that rhetoric a lot, but any character who says you have to be playing perfectly doesn't sound like a good character to me, right? Like, if I played Nomu perfectly and made all the right decisions and had all the right cards, Nomu would be S tier. So I can't really agree with that sort of rhetoric, but I can agree that he is positioned very well against characters like Momo, well, a little bit against Momo, but Ojiro 2, Dabi 2, Asui 1, okay against All Might, but we'll talk about All Might more. But I do think that Jiro and Tokoyami really just have the sauce most of the time. And, you know, when you're erasing characters that are like looking for more cards and they just already have the cards, it's really difficult. So Eraserhead doesn't quite make it to my S tier, but he's always been high on my tier list regardless of his tournament results. So it's nothing new to see him at the top. And then the biggest surprise for a lot of people is probably Ojiro 2. I might be downplaying this a little bit, but again, I'm trying to look at these like in a vacuum, and I don't think Ojiro 2 by himself is strictly better than Jiro, Tokoyami, or All Might 3. I just don't think it's a better deck. You know, all three of those characters at least do something on the rival's turn, right? Into that Eraserhead matchup, they at least ask the question, are you willing to erase on your own turn? And Ojiro is weak to Eraserhead because he doesn't have that. He has no extra folds to his game plan, and his game plan relies on his character. It's built around his character, whereas those top three meta decks are pretty much good stuff piles that fit, you know, one single keyword theme, right? You just happen to have like the best attacks on each of those symbols that share your keywords. So I think Ojiro is a little linear, a little narrow, but he's absolutely the best at what he does, and he could easily become S tier with like one or more cards, right? So I'm putting him high A tier. Him and Eraserhead are like currently the talks of the town, but in our S tier we have All Might 3, a character that is just a little bit slept on, and the main thing about All Might 3 is the way he warps the game. He warps the way you play the game, and now more than ever, he just has insane support. The good symbol has insane cards right now. And the all symbol's doing really good too, but you know, I'm really a huge fan of the small limbers that can reset your draw cost. You know, you've got more stun 2 moves than ever. You can make basically an entire stun punch deck if you want. You know, there's ways to refund his costs with, you know, I've seen people play Invisible Infiltration so that they can reset all their small limbers and a foundation that they used to draw a card, you know. There's so many tools for this deck. It is great on turn 2. It is great on turn 10. If you build enough deadlock threats, I think you just beat Momo and you just beat Eraserhead. If you want to play race cards with Ojiro, you've got better speed hate than he's going to have most of the time. Even if they're on the all symbol and they're running that specialist of sound right, forcing Ojiro to block with attacks, much bigger deal than forcing All Might to block with attacks. So that 8 hand size, 30 health, once you get over that turn 2 hump, I think he's just pound for pound way too good right now. And he is incredibly frustrating to actually try and play the game against because, you know, good symbol punches are so good at putting together long strings. Back alley haymaker stresses you out. You've got small and limbers to refund those costs. You've got cards like Lost in Thought now. You've got To the Rescue. So now he can affect your board. That's the one thing All Might was missing, was ways to affect your board. And he recently got 2 awesome ways in consecutive sets to touch your board and get rid of your defensive threats. So that is something that the Ojiro decks haven't had a ton of, right? They've got, nobody really wants to run on a 4-check apathetic, so they're relying on cards like Seizing the Advantage from their hand, whereas All Might can sit on cards like Lost in Thought. He can sit on cards like To the Rescue until it's time to go in. And then again, just combined with the good symbols, Deadlock makes him a really good deck, both in the early game and in the late game. Tokoyami 1 hasn't gone anywhere. They haven't really nerfed him. You know, Stronger in Darkness was kind of a big hit, but they gave him all kinds of really cool support with the newest set. I think a lot of people are still on Chaos. Fire looks a lot better now, though. But Cremation is an absolutely awesome card to pair with Dark Shadow Ruin. Chaos Symbol still has stats everywhere, still one of the best Petty Squabble users anyways, even though it's not like a draw 4 mechanic now anymore. Still one of the best one with nature users. Still does things on defense, you know, -1 damage means you gotta usually deal like 23 to kill him, especially if you're not going all in one go with like a 1.3 million symbol. So absolutely still the top tier. Not surprised to see either of these characters here. And then, of course, the menace that is Jiro. If you thought Summon Dark Shadow was good, what if every card in your card pool is Summon Dark Shadow? I think Jiro is specifically positioned well against basically every single one of these decks. She's the only character that gets to put damage on flash attacks regularly. She's the only character that has a regularly scaling offense that doesn't even really need foundations. You know, it is not something that scales way into late game. She doesn't scale with more cards drawn, right? She doesn't need to be discarding cards for one with nature. Really, all she has to do is pass checks, and she has everything available in her own kit to do that. And then on top of that, she gets double jab pummel. So destined for mainstream, double jab pummel, scouting the top 2 cards, Soundwave's putting a card there. It's all too much. She is Ojiro plus, in my opinion. She is Ojiro 2 without the maximum 3. And the only thing, like you're never going to be able to print another weapon charge on the air symbol or the good symbol. And you probably shouldn't do it for the all symbol. So she is not only warping the format basically around, can you race Jiro? Can you hate on her like you can't even hate on her momentum. You don't actually get to do that. You don't actually have a time frame in which you get to hate on momentum. She is the least interactable deck. She trivializes the most important part of the game, which is control checks, which is taking risk. And she is just good enough defensively. She is just solid enough defensively. Destined for mainstream is something I talked about a lot, set 1 and 2, as a surprisingly good defensive piece to allow you to not check poorly on turn 2 and just survive those turns, right? Remember those order decks that are like, hey, if your deck doesn't perform really well, if you check a 3 at the wrong time, you just lose. Well, guess who doesn't do that? Jiro with destined for mainstream successes. So it's gonna be it takes colossally bad luck for Jiro to, you know, flame out. So I have to put her not only in the S tier, but absolutely at the top of S tier. But you guys let me know. Who do you think is going to win the Oceanic Regionals tonight? Who do you think I left off? Who deserves to be on this tier list? Because, again, I left all the chaff out. I'm not going to spend... I've done this for 2 hours at a time on live stream. I figured I'd crank out a relatively quick one for you guys and just give my thoughts on pretty much every tier and all the characters that I expect to be in the meta. I wouldn't be surprised if the top 16 is literally just S and A tiers from my list. I, of course, think that like 1 or 2 characters are going to squeak in. You know, MHA, CCG players really, really value their individuality and their deck expression. You know, I just had Pip on the podcast last night saying that they're special snowflake and they refuse to play popular characters. And so that's what makes up the majority of our card game player base, and that's a good reason why you're going to see these characters winning the events a lot, because they're not going to have to face mirror matches. They're not going to have to, you know, we saw in the HLC when people were really competing, there's a lot more mirror matches, right? So anyhow, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. What did I get wrong? What did I miss? Who do you think is the best character? Is it Jiro? Is there any real discussion around which character is pound for pound the best? Because the format is so slanted towards offense. I feel like it has to be Jiro. She's got fast momentum. She's got foundation readying. She passes her checks. She just does it all. She gets speed and damage. She does it all. So that's going to be it for me, guys. I'm going to see you guys later tonight on the Oceanic broadcast. I'm going to be doing commentary with Levi and Jesse Cervini. Super excited for that. So please tune in, check it out, and see that I am correct. This is going to be your future format for Set 4 League of Villains. Peace out, everybody. I'll see you next time.